Hey guys, tonight we begin with something dark, grotesque, and all too real. Not ancient wars or royal conspiracies, but the silent, creeping terror that turned cities into graveyards and neighbours into strangers. The Black Death. It wasn't just a disease, it was fear in the air, rot in the streets, and death knocking door to door. And if you think you'd survive even a single day, well, tonight may change your mind. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far this little storytelling corner of the internet reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe crack a window, let the night air in. And let's descend into a time when every breath might have been your last. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, it didn't matter if you were young, old, pious or sinful. When the plague rolled in, it didn't knock. It bled into your village like smoke through a broken window, quiet at first, then choking. But long before the black swellings burst beneath your arms, long before the fever took your mind, you had noticed something else. The smell. The scent of the Black Death wasn't like rot you'd know today. It was far worse. Imagine stepping out into the narrow cobbled streets of your medieval town in the early morning, thinking it's quiet. Peaceful, even. The fog hangs low, the baker hasn't fired his oven, birds aren't singing. That's when it hits you. A wave of thick, oily air. A mixture of sweat, bile, old blood and something else. Something wet, like a fresh wound left out in the sun. You cover your nose, but it doesn't help. The smell clings to your clothes, your skin. It seeps into the wood of your home, into the straw of your mattress. And no matter how many herbs you burn, how tightly you press that pouch of lavender to your mouth, it lingers. You haven't even seen a corpse yet, but your body knows something's wrong. Your dog won't stop barking. The neighbour's cat hasn't been seen in days, and every morning a few more shutters stay closed. The baker's son is coughing. He wasn't yesterday. You think about running, but to where? Every road is worse. And in the chaos, you forget something vital. Clean water. The well hasn't been cleaned in months. The ropes are fraying. Half the town drinks from the same place and no one has any idea that water can carry death. You pour a wooden cup, think it smells a little strange and drink it anyway, just to stay alive, just to feel full. That single sip might be the beginning of your end. It spreads faster than anyone can track. Not by demons or curses, though that's what the priests say, but by fleas, biting rats, by a cough in a crowded alleyway, by the breath of your child while she sleeps beside you. And when you finally see the first cart roll down the street, pulled by a limping mule, piled high with bodies, you freeze. These aren't just the dead, you know them. The girl who sold apples, the monk who limped when he walked, the butcher's wife with the missing teeth, all stacked like sacks of grain, their eyes glassy and skin dark as ink. You want to scream, you want to turn away, but you can't stop staring. That's when it hits you. This is no fever that passes. This is no common illness. This is something else, something biblical. And deep down, whether you admit it or not, you start to believe the whispers that this is punishment, that God has turned his face away. There is no warning bell, no official decree. Panic doesn't arrive like thunder. It spreads in glances, in the way people avoid each other on the street, in the food left untouched at the market stall, in the quiet sobbing behind thin walls at night. You go home, you lock your door, but it's too late. You're sweating. You haven't eaten in a day. There's a black spot under your arm, no larger than a coin. As you press it, pain shoots through you like fire. And suddenly, you understand. You wouldn't last a day. Not because you're weak, not because you lack courage, but because nothing in your life, nothing has prepared you for this. Not the isolation, not the fear, not the weight of hearing your loved one cough once, twice, then stop breathing before sunrise. And still, the hardest part is this. There's no help coming. Doctors are gone. Most have fled. Those who remain are wrapped in wax cloaks and terrifying bird masks, stuffed with herbs to keep the bad air out. They don't cure, they don't comfort. They arrive like spectres, poke at your wounds and leave. Priests walk by your door murmuring prayers, but they don't stop. They can't afford to. The churchyards are full. The gravediggers are drunk and overwhelmed. Graves are shallow and shared by strangers. Bodies are burned by torchlight and the smoke never really clears. You start coughing. You start shaking. You're too weak to leave bed, too scared to call for help. And just before the fever carries you somewhere dark and unknowable, you hear something that chills you deeper than death itself, laughter. Somewhere in the street someone is laughing, not because they're cruel, but because grief has finally cracked their mind wide open. Because this plague is more than a disease, it's a collapse of everything you once believed. Justice, mercy, family, faith. And in that final moment you finally understand why no one really survives the plague, even if they live. You wake up in darkness, you don't remember falling asleep, but now the shadows in your room feel heavier. Your mouth is dry, your lips are cracked. When you try to move, your limbs resist. Sore, stiff and trembling. You shift in bed and feel the straw beneath your blanket crunch like brittle bones. Your shirt clings to your skin, soaked with sweat. And then the smell hits you again. Not from the streets this time, but from your own body. It's sharp, sour, like rotting onions and open wounds. Your breath reeks. You can't tell if it's from the fever or something deeper. Something inside you breaking down. Your stomach groans. You haven't eaten in a day, maybe more, but even the thought of food makes you gag. Then you notice it. The lump beneath your armpit. It wasn't this big yesterday, it's the size of a plum now. It's tight, angry, and purple-black in the centre. The skin is stretched so thin you're afraid it might burst if you move wrong. You reach out, fingers shaking, and barely touch it. Pain shoots through your chest. You bite your lip hard to stop from screaming. And this is just the beginning. In the next hour, you'll sweat through every layer of clothing you own. You'll hallucinate shapes in the corners of the room, swear that your dead grandmother is whispering from the shadows, and you'll beg someone, anyone, to bring water. But there's no one left in the house. Your family locked the door from the outside before they fled. To protect themselves, to protect others, or maybe to protect you from yourself. You're alone now, utterly alone. The mind begins to go before the body is done. First, time becomes a blur. Daylight, night. What's the difference? You hear footsteps outside, then nothing. Then a scream, then silence. The silence is the worst part. It's too complete, too final. Even the rats aren't scratching at the walls anymore. When the pain lessens, it's not because you're healing, it's because your body is giving up. Your fingers are cold, your toes are colder. Black patches are blooming across your skin like spilled ink. You feel them but can't reach them. You try to sit up and your vision goes white. This is when you understand what true helplessness feels like. Not fear, not pain, but the realization that your life has narrowed to the size of a single room, a single bed, a single breath. And that breath is shallow. But you're still conscious. And consciousness at this stage is cruel, because now the guilt creeps in. Did you curse the old woman on the street corner who muttered strange prayers? Did you push past the coughing beggar without offering a coin? Did you ignore the priest when he said the end was near? You think of your mother, your brother, your children if you have them. Are they alive? Are they dying somewhere, just like you, wondering if anyone will come? And then a knock. It's so soft you wonder if it's real. But it comes again, harder, this time. You try to speak, but your voice is gone, so you wait. The door creaks open, and through the blur of fever and tears you see a silhouette. A man, tall, draped in black, with a mask shaped like a bird's beak. The plague doctor. He doesn't speak, he doesn't comfort. He walks slowly, methodically, like someone moving through a battlefield. You see the glint of metal tools in his bag. You hear the crunch of herbs under his boots. He leans over you. You want to ask, am I going to die? But you don't, because you already know. Instead, he mutters a prayer. Latin. Words that feel like cold water on your burning skin. He examines the buboes. He touches nothing. No leeches today, no bleeding, no poultice. It's too late for that. He pulls something from his coat, an X-shaped stick wrapped in cloth, and places it on your chest. That's the sign. The mark. It tells the world this one is dying, or worse, already dead. He leaves just as silently as he came. You lie there, eyes wide, breath shallow. And for a brief moment, something inside you breaks. Not your body, your will. You want to die, not because you're suicidal, but because death now feels like the only kindness left. The only door that's still open. But your body is stubborn. It clings to life even as your soul tries to let go. Your heart thumps, your lungs wheeze, the fever rages, and you drift. You dream strange dreams of fire, of water, of standing in a clean field with sunlight on your skin. You smile in the dream. Then you wake up to the sound of coughing, your own, and you realize the nightmare is here. Reality is the sickness. Someone's crying in the alley outside, a baby maybe, or a man who thinks he's still a child. Your mind can't tell the difference anymore. The rats return. They climb along the rafters. They sniff the edge of your bed. They know you're too weak to move. One of them sits on your chest for a moment, twitching its nose. You try to swat it away. You fail. And in that humiliation, in that small, wretched moment, you realize what the plague really takes from you. Not just life, but dignity. The rats don't care who you were. A priest, a merchant, a child, a mother. It's all the same now. The fever takes you again, this time deeper. And just before you slip into unconsciousness, you remember a story you heard once about cities far away where the plague never reached. Places with clean air and flowing water, where bells still ring in churches and children still play in the streets. You wonder if those places are real. You wonder if you'll see them when this ends. You wonder if there's anything left of you to remember. And as your chest rises and falls like the last embers of a fire, you finally understand you wouldn't last a day during the plague. Not because you're weak, but because no one does. Even those who survive never truly come back whole. By the time the city finally admitted it was dying, it was already a corpse in motion. The church bells had stopped ringing, not from reverence or mourning, but because there were no hands left to ring them. The priests were gone, buried, burned, fled. Some wandered the streets barefoot, eyes wide with madness, robes dark with filth, mumbling prayers. Even God seemed too afraid to answer. You wouldn't hear crowds anymore. No gossip at the market. No children chasing chickens through muddy alleys. No blacksmith's hammer. Just one sound over and over, like a heartbeat pulsing through the city walls. Coughing, hacking, wet, breathless coughing, echoing from homes, from behind locked shutters, from alleyways where no one dared look too closely. If you stepped outside, if you were brave or foolish enough, you'd see what was left of humanity's attempts to pretend. A basket of shriveled onions sitting outside a shop with no owner. A flower pot smashed on cobblestones, its soil dried out weeks ago. A man in a fine tunic scrubbing his front steps for the 12th time in a day, red-eyed and whispering, "It can't climb clean stone." And you wouldn't last a day because your instincts would betray you. You'd want to help. You'd reach out when someone stumbled. You'd knock on your neighbour's door when you heard screaming. You'd give your last bit of bread to a child crying alone in the street. And each of those decisions would sign your death warrant. Because this plague didn't reward kindness, it punished it. Mercy became a liability, compassion a curse. Entire families vanished because one person decided not to shut the door. But even if you stayed inside, sealed the windows, said your prayers, boiled your water, you'd still feel it pressing in from every corner. Fear, not just of the disease, but of each other. Paranoia became a religion of its own. People turned on siblings. Parents locked their children out. Husbands buried wives without ceremony, without tears. No one knew how it spread, only that it did. Fast, ruthless, and always close. And if you tried to flee the city, you wouldn't get far. Guards, if there were any left, had sealed the gates. Not for your safety, but to keep the infection from leaking into the next town. To those on the outside, your city was no longer a place. It was a plague pit. A wound on the map. Travellers avoided it like fire. Merchants rerouted their caravans. Priests crossed themselves and walked faster. You were trapped. And inside, death wasn't waiting anymore. It was hunting. Cart drivers became some of the most powerful men in the city. Not kings or priests or scholars, just men with strong backs and iron stomachs, willing to haul the dead to mass graves outside the walls. You'd hear them roll through the streets at dawn, calling in flat, emotionless voices. Bring out your dead. No one wept anymore. Not because they didn't care, but because they were too dry inside. There were no more tears. Grief had become a daily routine. You'd feel something crack in your chest when you passed a doorway with a red mark and remembered the person who used to live there. But you'd keep walking. You had to. Some turned to madness, others to magic. Desperate remedies flooded the alleys like floodwater. Drink vinegar, swallow ash, rub yourself with butter and crushed emeralds. People burned sulphur in their homes. thinking the smoke would drive the sickness out. Some believed the air was cursed, so they wore masks stuffed with cloves and rose petals, not knowing it was the flea on the rat in their basement that was killing them. If you were smart, maybe you wouldn't believe all of it. Maybe you'd try to hold on to reason, but reason can't comfort you when the girl you love dies in your arms, shivering and speckled with black boils. Reason doesn't help when you see someone dragging their mother's body down the street on a tarp, because there's no one left to carry her there. Even the rats looked thinner now, hungrier, bolder. They'd eat the fingers off a corpse and then sniff your boots for warmth. Cats vanished. Dogs howled at night, confused and alone. The city's heartbeat had changed. It no longer beat for growth or trade or worship. It beat only for survival. And then one day the coughing stopped. Not because the city healed, because there were too few left to cough. There's a moment, a strange, still moment, when the plague takes nearly everything, and what remains looks like peace. The streets are quiet. The sky's clear, smoke no longer rises from chimneys. The dead are still. And it feels for just a second like maybe it's over. But then you remember, the silence isn't peace, it's emptiness. That's when the looters come. Men who think death is done with this place, but still eager to snatch rings off fingers and gold from the mouths of the dead. You see them wandering, faces half covered, eyes greedy, breaking into homes that smell of rot, digging through the clothes of the fallen. They're not afraid anymore. That's what makes them dangerous. If you survive this long, you're not safe. You're just waiting for your own body to betray you, because even if you avoided the first wave, it always circled back. Like a wolf testing the fence line. A second wave, a third, sometimes worse than the first. It wasn't just one sickness, it were many. Bubonic, pneumonic, septicemic. It evolved, adapted. The city didn't get a chance to recover before it was struck again. And no one ever knew when the next cough, the next bubo, the next fever would bloom. You sleep with one eye open now, not just because of sickness, but because those who survived the longest sometimes, they snapped. They killed for bread, for warmth, for silence, because there are some things worse than death, and living long enough to watch your city become a grave with windows might be one of them. That's why you wouldn't last a day, not because you're weak, but because the plague took more than lives. It took meaning, it took reason, it took the very rules of being human and rewrote them in blood, bile and ash. You'd think death would be swift, that the plague would come crashing into your life like a hammer, one blow and it's over. But that's not how it works. Not really. What breaks you isn't the moment your body gives out, it's the waiting. The slow unraveling of everything you thought you could rely on. Your strength, your family, your faith, your own sanity. If you were still alive now, days into the outbreak, weeks maybe, you weren't doing well. You weren't one of the lucky ones, no one was, you were just one of the last ones. And that might be worse, because what remained of the world didn't resemble life, not even close. There were no more services in the churches. The altars sat covered in dust, candles melted down to stubs. The air inside was sour, thick with mildew and desperation. The pews were empty, except for the occasional dead man slumped over in prayer, as if hoping death might still listen to confession. The saints carved in wood stared down from the walls, their painted eyes chipped and weathered. You'd look up at them, mouth dry, and wonder, did they survive their own plagues? Did they ever smell what I smell now? Probably not. Their faces stayed serene, frozen in divine indifference. Outside, even nature turned its back. The sky seemed permanently grey, like ash had been stirred into the clouds. Crows followed the death carts, fat from the feast. Dogs dug shallow holes in the earth, desperate for something, food, water, warmth. Fields went untended, crops withered, chickens ran wild, laying eggs in gutters and dying days later from starvation. And you were trying to keep breathing. Your skin was yellowing now, your breath stank like decay. You'd stopped sweating, not because the fever had passed, but because your body didn't have anything left to lose. When you coughed, it came from deep inside your ribs, raw and tearing. Sometimes there was blood, sometimes there wasn't. You learnt not to check anymore. Your mouth bled, your teeth loosened. You passed water like air, and all the while your mind remained awake, alert. That's the curse. You watch yourself fall apart like a building crumbling brick by brick. Not instantly, but in agonizing slow motion. You see your reflection in a cracked bit of glass, sunken cheeks, swollen eyes, skin blistered and blackened, and you realize the person you were is already gone. You're just what's left. You think of clean beds, warm bread, the touch of another person's hand, not for healing, not for pity, just to feel real again. You'd give anything for that, anything. But no one touches anymore. No one dares. Not even mothers hold their children now. Love has turned into a risk, intimacy into a sentence. So you lie in your corner, wrapped in a cloak that smells of smoke and sweat. And you listen. The city speaks in a new language now. The low roll of wheels carrying away corpses. The shuffle of feet dragging through the mud. The screams, distant, sharp, then cut off too suddenly. And then there's the humming. That's new. People hum to themselves, tuneless and quiet, just to hear something other than silence. Even madness, it seems, prefers background music. And through all of it, you wait. Not for healing, not anymore. You wait for the man with the cart. He comes in the early dawn, not every day, not regularly. But he comes, he doesn't knock, he doesn't ask questions, he just opens your door if it's unlocked, and looks. Sometimes he's alone, sometimes he brings a boy to help. Neither speak. They see you lying there, your chest still rising, and move on. But one day they won't. One day your body will be still enough, your eyes glassy enough, that they'll mistake you for dead. Or they'll hope you are. They'll haul you up like a sack of grain, toss you onto a cart already slick with fluids from the others, and take you away. You may be alive when this happens, some were. There are stories, terrible, unforgettable stories of people moaning from the pile buried alive beneath the weight of the truly dead. But no one listens, no one checks. There's simply no time. And that's the truth. During the plague, no one dies with dignity. There are no funerals, no gravestones, no eulogies whispered through tears. There's only quick disposal and quiet forgetting. Mass pits filled by the hour. Lime thrown over the top to hide the smell, dirt shoveled in without ceremony. The names of the dead lost before they hit the bottom. You wouldn't last a day because death came not just for your body, but for your story. It erased you. All that you were, all that you built, all the memories others had of you, gone. And if by some miracle you did survive, what then? You'd come back to a hollow world, your family gone, your town gutted, the streets changed, the laughter of children replaced by whispers and superstition. People would avoid you, not out of cruelty, but because they feared the reminder. You were a ghost in the flesh, a walking reminder of the horror they couldn't understand. Some survivors walked into the woods and never came back. Others drank themselves into silence. A few wrote down what they saw, but even those writings feel hollow now, scraps of memory clinging to a crumbling world. And yet the worst part wasn't the silence or the stench or the suffering. It was this. The plague didn't end, not really. It never had a finish line. It faded, quietly. Not because it was defeated, but because it had taken what it came for. What was left wasn't healing, it was numbness. A half-dead world blinking in confusion, wondering if the nightmare had truly passed or simply taken a break. That's what you'd wake up to if you were unlucky enough to survive. A stillness so heavy, it felt like the world was holding its breath. And you would too, because deep inside you'd know it wasn't over, it never truly was. At first, survival feels noble. You imagine yourself as the one who outsmarts death, who boils herbs, seals windows, eats carefully. You try to sleep lightly, drink clean water, ration your bread. You imagine endurance as a virtue, a sign of strength. But survival during the plague has nothing to do with strength. It has everything to do with what you're willing to become. You wouldn't last a day, not because you're too soft or too fragile, but because deep down you still believe there's a line, that there are things a decent person would never do, that if the world falls apart, you'll remain human. But the plague is the great eraser of certainty, and soon enough you're looking at yourself in the broken shard of a mirror, wondering how much of you is still there. It begins small. Maybe you take food from a cart meant for the sick. It was going to rot anyway, you tell yourself. Better you eat it than let it go to waste. Then maybe you stop answering the door when someone knocks for help. You're not being cruel, you're being careful. They could be sick, and you're not a doctor. Then the baby next door starts crying. Her parents have died. She's all alone. You put your hands over your ears. You tell yourself someone else will take her. Someone stronger, someone cleaner. The crying stops the next morning. You don't ask what happened. You don't want to know. Each of these decisions feels justifiable, logical, necessary, but they change you. Every small compromise becomes a brick in the wall you're building between who you were and who you are now. The wall gets taller, thicker. Eventually, you stop praying. It feels hollow anyway. Your God is quiet. Too quiet. The only time you see the church doors open now is when they're using the nave to stack bodies. So you begin looking elsewhere for guidance. Some wear charms of bone, others wear dried flowers strung on leather cords. Still others carry small wooden figures carved by a blind woman said to have been passed over by the sickness. You hold yours tightly even though you don't believe in magic. Or maybe now you do. Belief you've learned is slippery. You hear stories of villagers who sacrificed livestock to the moon, or covered children in mud and buried them up to the neck for 3 nights to trick the plague into thinking they were already dead. Madness, you think. Ugh, barbaric. Until you find yourself dragging a goat out of the stable with shaking hands, a prayer half formed in your mouth. Not because it makes sense, but because it might. And you're running out of option. Food is scarce now, you haven't had a proper meal in days. You dream of bread, of meat, of apples plump and red. You wake to chew leather straps just to keep your jaw moving. Once, you catch a rat. You skin it. Cook it over a fire of broken chair legs. You gag. You swallow. Later, you hear voices. You don't know if they're real. You start seeing things in the corner of your eye. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Faces on walls that disappear when you blink. You tell yourself it's fever, hunger, isolation, but that doesn't stop the fear. One night, someone breaks into your home. You hear them before you see them. Soft feet, a low breath. You sit up fast, knife in hand. The stranger's barely more than a boy, ribs showing through his shirt. He raises his hands, says nothing. You don't speak either. For a long moment, you stare at each other. Then you gesture to the corner of the room where some dried beans sit in a cracked bowl. You're not being generous. You're making a deal. Leave me alive and take what you need. He does. Quietly. He never looks back. You sit awake until morning, knife in your lap, realizing that now you trust no one. Not even the dying. Especially not the dying. And yet somehow you go on. One more hour, one more night, one more day. That's what survival becomes, a negotiation. Not just with the world, but with yourself. Each day you trade away one more piece of what used to be normal. Clean clothes, manners, hope. You forget what it's like to laugh, to sing, to be touched without flinching. You wouldn't last a day because survival here is ugly. It's not cinematic, it's not heroic. It's not a battle you win with grit and bravery. It's a slow rot of the soul, a daily choosing between desperation and guilt. And sometimes you lose track of which you chose, because one day, when you hear a cough on the other side of a wall, you don't feel fear. You feel relief. Someone else will die before me. And in that moment, quiet, shameful, unspoken, you realize what the plague has made you. Not a survivor, not a fighter, but someone who would rather see a stranger die than have to face the fever again yourself. That's what the plague does. It doesn't kill all at once. It drains, it digs, it leaves the body as a shell and the soul cracked open like a burned-out candle. It teaches you that sometimes living through the worst year of your life means becoming someone you would have once condemned. And if you're still here, sitting by a window, watching the sun rise over a ruined city, you ask yourself, what did I survive for? Because the world you knew is gone, and the world that's coming next. It doesn't care how noble you were, only that you were willing to lose yourself to see another dawn. And maybe, just maybe, that's the final reason you wouldn't last a day. You wouldn't want to. By now the plague isn't just in the air, it's in the walls, in the dreams, in the steers whispered at dusk by people too frightened to speak them in daylight. The longer you survive, the more you realize something terrible. This sickness doesn't just destroy bodies, it warps reality. And even if your body remains untouched, your mind doesn't stand a chance. You wouldn't last a day because the silence after death is never truly silent. It starts with sounds. A door creaking in the wind. A cough from a room you sealed off 3 days ago. Scratching at the shutters, faint but deliberate. Footsteps in an alley you know is empty. You listen closely. You want to dismiss it. Rats, wind, creaky beams. But it's not the sound that gets to you. It's the pattern. The rhythm. It sounds too human. You begin to wonder, is it the living or the dead? People don't talk about it openly, but you hear it in the way they lower their voices, in the way they glance toward graves with unease. Some say the souls of the unburied roam, angry at the world that discarded them. Others say it's something deeper, something dark stirred up by all this mass death. You're not sure you believe in ghosts, but belief is a fragile thing when you're hungry, sleep-deprived, and surrounded by a city that smells like a battlefield. Your neighbour swears she saw her husband last night. He died 2 weeks ago. She says he was standing in the doorway, covered in earth, just watching her sleep. She's not mad, she's not hysterical. Her voice is flat, calm, resolved. 2 days later, her door is left swinging open. She's gone. No one goes inside. You hear more stories. Someone heard crying in the basement of the old bakery. Someone else saw candles lit in the church, even though it's been locked for weeks. Someone else still keeps a plate out every night for their dead daughter, because they swear they hear her footsteps in the kitchen just before dawn. You don't want to believe any of it, but then you wake one night, heart pounding, drenched in sweat, and you swear you heard your mother whisper your name. She's been gone for months. You tell yourself it's just the fever. That's what they all say. But there is a truth behind the madness, something deeper. It's not that the dead rise, it's that the living can't let them go, not when their bodies are never buried properly, not when their names are unspoken, their lives forgotten. Death used to be a ritual, a process. Grief had structure. Now it's on the chaos, and when someone dies, they're shoved into the dirt like trash. No prayers, no grave markers, no final goodbyes. It tears something loose in people, something primal, and in that tearing things crawl in. You hear the priest, what's left of him, ranting in the square, clothes tattered, eyes wild. The veil is thinner now, he screams. The veil is bleeding. No one stops him, no one mocks him, because deep down, they feel it too. The veil is bleeding. You start having nightmares. They are not just vivid, they're invasive. You wake gasping, convinced that someone was in the room with you. You light a candle, watch the shadows, sometimes they move wrong, flicker against walls they shouldn't. You stop sleeping altogether. You sit with your back against the door, knife in hand, telling yourself over and over, I'm not sick, I'm not sick, I'm not sick, but your mind is. All of ours are. Some turn to ritual. A woman down the street draws chalk circles around her door. A man burns pages of holy books in a brass bowl while chanting in a language no one recognizes. These aren't just acts of superstition anymore, they're attempts to anchor reality. Because no one knows where the plague ends and something else begins. There's a phrase you keep hearing, the plague is only the beginning. You used to think it was metaphor. Now you're not so sure. You see a figure at night. Not clearly, not directly, but it's there, in the edge of your vision. Tall, covered in tattered robes. It never approaches, just watches. You blink, and it's gone. You've stopped opening your windows. Not because of infection, but because you don't want to see what walks past them anymore. And here's the worst part. You start talking to the dead too, not in madness, not with delusion, but out of habit. You whisper apologies. You ask forgiveness. You say their names to the walls, the floor, the dirt, and somewhere deep inside you hope they're listening. Because if they're listening, they haven't turned against you. Yet. The city is collapsing, not just physically, but spiritually. There is no center anymore. No moral compass, no social contract. Just whispers, rituals, and shadows that feel a little too solid when the moon is high. You wouldn't last a day because your sense of what is real, what is safe, would disintegrate. You'd be like the rest of us, sitting in a room that smells of mold and candle wax, scratching symbols into the walls just to feel like you're doing something. And maybe that's the real terror. Not the disease, not the death, but the emptiness that comes after. The invisible unraveling, the growing sense that maybe the plague didn't kill the soul, it just opened the door wide enough for something else to step in. And once it's in, you don't get to leave. Not unchanged, not whole, not truly alive. By now, you've stopped wondering if you're going to die. The real question is how, because every death you've seen has been different. Some fast, some slow, some screaming, some terrifyingly quiet. You've seen children die in minutes, their little bodies convulsing in their mother's arms. You've seen strong men rot over weeks, turned into shaking husks by fever and infection. You've seen people claw at their own skin to try and rip the sickness out. And you've realized something that never quite leaves your mind. No amount of preparation matters. You can wash your hands, you can boil your water, you can sleep alone in a locked room. But the plague doesn't care. You could do everything right and still find yourself coughing blood by the morning. It wasn't a punishment. It wasn't fate. It was just random, ruthless, math written in blood. There's no safety in logic, no escape through good behavior. That's part of what breaks you. Because you've been told all your life that being careful saves you, that being clean protects you, that faith shields you, that wealth cushions you. But during the plague, the line between the cautious and the careless, the noble and the vile, it vanishes. The richest merchant in the city, dead within a week, died surrounded by gold with servants too afraid to enter the room. His mansion is empty now, rats chewing at silk curtains and dragging bread crusts across marble floors. The midwife, who always wore cloves in her apron, washed her hands, burned herbs after every patient, carried to the pit by morning, left behind a row of unlit candles and a house that smells like rosemary and regret. The monastery that sealed its doors the moment the sickness reached the city. Dead monks piled in the courtyard, these blue mouths frozen in open prayers. The plague doesn't knock, it seeps through walls, through touch, through air, through the mere act of being alive near someone else. And when it comes for you, it comes quietly. You feel fine in the morning. You hum with stretch. You eat what little you have left. You try to sweep the floor, maybe fix the broken shutter. You even laugh, briefly, at a memory that hits you out of nowhere. Then around noon, your head begins to ache. Not enough to worry, not yet. Just pressure behind your eyes. You sit down, rest. An hour later, you're sweating. Your muscles ache. Your joints throb. Your neck stiffens. You tell yourself it's exhaustion. The heat, stress. By sundown, the shivering begins. Your skin goes cold even as your body burns. And then comes the nausea, the dizziness, the feeling that your insides are liquefying. You stumble to your bed, clutching at the wall. By midnight, you see the first bubo swelling under your jaw. That's when you know. You've been marked. You wouldn't last a day, not just because of the disease, but because of the realization. The moment your hand brushes that swollen, hot knot under your skin, you don't think, I can fight this. You think, it's my turn. That's what the plague does. It wears you down long before the fever does. You've seen too much. You've heard too many death screams. You've watched too many faces vanish. You know how this ends. Hope doesn't rise up, it folds in on itself. You lie down, you close your eyes, and you try to stay calm. You try not to panic. You try to not think about the fact that you might die alone, that no one will carry you, that the window will stay open just a crack too long, and the birds will get in, that your body might be eaten by vermin before the cart even comes. You start hearing voices, not ghostly ones this time, your own. Your thoughts get loud. Should I leave? Should I walk to the edge of town? Should I warn someone? Should I just run and run and run until I collapse? But you don't move. You can't. And maybe that's mercy, because outside the world's no safer. There are no more healers. The apothecaries are gone. The so-called doctors still left are little more than robed scavengers, men who wear beaked masks filled with perfume and carry sticks to prod you like livestock. If they come to your door, they won't bring help. They'll bring silence. They'll look at your face, your skin, the black marks blooming on your neck like crushed berries. And they'll step back, nod once, and mark your door. A single stroke of red paint, a death sentence made visible. Your neighbours see it the next morning. They don't come close, they don't speak your name, they leave food at the edge of the street if they're generous. Some turn their backs completely. You are, in every sense, already gone. That's what it means to get sick during the plague. You don't die at the end. You die at the beginning, the second you realise you're next. And you wait. Wait for the swelling to spread. Wait for your body to betray you. Wait for your own voice to grow hoarse and panicked and unrecognisable. Eventually, you can't get up, can't walk, can't eat. You soil the bed. You weep, not from pain, but from shame. You don't remember what day it is. The light comes and goes behind shutter cracks. Time becomes irrelevant. You think of the people you wronged, the people you loved. You think of the conversations you'll never finish, the letters you never sent, the apologies you didn't say aloud. And then the world begins to blur. The pain fades, not because you're healing, but because your nerves are shutting down. Your body no longer fights. It's tired. So tired. You don't know when the cart comes. You don't remember being lifted. You don't feel the pit. And just like that, you vanish. No one says your name, no one sings a song, no one tells your story. You, who once loved and worked and laughed and believed, are now just another number. Another notch carved into the tally of the dead. And that more than anything is why you wouldn't last a day during the plague. Because the worst part of dying here isn't the suffering, it's being erased. It's strange, isn't it, how easily trust crumbles. In the beginning, people believed in help, they believed in structure. The doctors would come, the authorities would organise things, the church would offer comfort. Someone somewhere would fix this. But during the plague, you learn quickly, no one is coming, not the kings, not the bishops, not the healers, especially not the healers. You wouldn't last a day because you'd still believe medicine exists. But plague doctors weren't healers in the way we think of them now. They weren't miracle workers. They weren't trained. Most didn't even want the job. They were often barbers, butchers, or failed academics hired by desperate towns to at least look official. Their true job was more bureaucratic than medical, to document death, prevent panic, and keep the sick in one place. Their most recognisable feature, the long black beak, wasn't for style. It was a mask stuffed with herbs, rose petals, or vinegar-soaked cloth, meant to filter out bad air. Miasma, they called it. The stench of decay was believed to carry the disease, and in a way they weren't entirely wrong. The air was deadly, just not in the way they thought. You might have felt relief the first time you saw one, towering in their waxed robe, wide-brimmed hat and reflective goggles. You would think, here is someone who can help me, someone who might give you a tonic or a prayer, or at least some hope, but then he'd pull out a long cane, not to heal you, but to poke you. He wouldn't touch you, not once. He'd keep distance. Always. Like you were already dead. He'd lift your chin with the tip of his stick. Maybe peel back your blanket, check for buboes. Then he'd mark something on a scrap of parchment. Sometimes he'd shake his head. Sometimes he wouldn't speak at all. And then he'd leave. No medicine, no comfort, no guidance. Just the sound of his boots echoing down the alley as your family realised what that silence meant. You'd think he was cold, cruel, but after weeks, months of watching people rot, bleed, cry, beg, what else could he become? Even the best of them changed. Some started burning incense constantly just to keep the smell of death off their clothes. Others started muttering charms under their breath. A few stopped visiting homes altogether, instead calling through doors. Still alive? If there was no answer, they moved on. Eventually, even the masks couldn't hide it. The shaking hands, the sunken eyes, the way they kept their backs to the walls, as if something might leap from the darkness and swallow them whole. Because some doctors did die. And when one of them did, when his mask was found abandoned in a puddle, or his body crumpled behind the altar steps, it terrified the city more than 100 common deaths. Because if the doctors couldn't survive, what chance did you have? That's when people gave up completely. You started seeing more red crosses painted on doors, not by the sick, but by the healthy. Families marking themselves preemptively, locking themselves inside and waiting for the end. Better to die together, quietly, than to be taken apart one by one. Even the wealthy lost their illusions. At first, the upper classes tried to escape. They fled to country estates, manors in the hills, private villas away from the city stink. But the plague followed, carried in by servants, by food deliveries, by wind perhaps. No one knows. And soon the rich began dying in silence with no one left to pay for their burials. The nobility fell like wheat under a scythe, and the doctors, they simply stopped showing up. You see, when the plague reached its height, it didn't just kill the poor, it devoured the system. The medical order collapsed. No more city contracts, no more payments, no more protection. And without structure, the plague doctors vanished. Some went mad, others fled. A few were found looting bodies, digging through clothes for coin, disguised in their robes like ghouls. One day, you wake up and realise you haven't seen a beak mask in 3 weeks, and you're not sure if that makes you feel better or worse. You begin treating yourself, not because you believe it will help, but because it gives your hand something to do. You boil water, though there's no wood left to burn. You chew raw garlic, you mash rosemary into a paste and smear it across your chest. The smell is sharp, bitter. It makes you gag, but it's better than the alternative. Doing nothing, because doing nothing means accepting the truth. You're entirely alone. That's when the charlatans arrive. Wandering salesmen, pretending to be plague experts. They sell powders made of ground bone, elixirs laced with wine and opium, tiny vials of dark liquid that they claim will draw out the death vapours if poured into your ear. They don't help, but people still buy them. With coin, with food, with anything they have left. And when that doesn't work, some turn to the strange and cruel. You hear of people cutting into their own skin, trying to let the sickness out. Others leech themselves with river worms. One man rubs his face with cat blood, convinced it will mask his scent from death. This isn't healing. This is madness masquerading as medicine. And through all of it, you keep asking the same question. Where did the doctors go? The answer is bitter, simple, human. They went wherever people weren't dying, because there's only so much horror one mind can take, only so many fevered eyes a man can look into before his soul fractures, only so many corpses a woman can carry before she becomes numb to her own heartbeat. And so the doctors too became casualties, not of the disease, but of the breaking point. That's why you wouldn't last a day. Because even those who wore masks and coats and gloves, who studied the human body, who trained for crisis, who stood at the edge of death and called themselves brave, even they couldn't bear it. So what chance did you ever have? There came a night when the sky itself seemed to give up. You wouldn't know it at first. You'd be lying in your usual corner, maybe half asleep, maybe wide-eyed, listening to the creak of beams and distant coughing. But slowly something would begin to settle on the city. A weight, a stillness, something too perfect, too deliberate. And then you'd look out the window. No wind, no noise, not even a rat's moving, just darkness. Complete, crushing, unbroken. Not a single star in the sky. You'd stare for minutes, thinking maybe clouds had rolled in. But the air wouldn't feel like before a storm. There would be no moisture, no scent of rain, no static on your skin, just cold and absence. You wouldn't last a day because this kind of silence, the kind where even the sky turns away, isn't something a sane person survives. During the plague, people stopped watching the heavens for signs of hope. They started reading them like they read wounds, for omens, for endings. Some believed the stars were blinking out one by one, each light a soul snuffed out. Others thought it was the earth itself, closing its eyes to what humanity had become. Whatever it was, that night left a mark. It was the first time even the wind refused to move through the streets, the first time no dogs barked, no doors creaked. The city became a painting, paused between moments, suspended in its own rot. You sat by the window longer than you should have, maybe because it felt safer than sleep, maybe because you were starting to think that if anything did come for you, it wouldn't be human. Not anymore. And that night it didn't. But something changed after that. You felt it in the bones of the city. The smell of death became normal. You stopped reacting to it. You didn't cover your nose when passing bodies. You didn't flinch at the bloated corpses in the canals. They were just part of the world now. Like potholes, like pigeons. But worse than that, you stopped reacting to people. A woman sobbing alone on her doorstep. You walk past. A boy whispering his dead brother's name. You don't turn around. You might look at them for a second, long enough to remember you're still a person, but then you move on. Because if you stop, you'll feel something, and you can't afford to feel anything anymore. Not now. Not after all this. There's a word for this kind of numbness. But during the plague, no one had time for definitions. You just became what the world needed to survive in it. Detached, hollowed out, and still alive. Barely. You'd look in the mirror, what's left of it, cracked and dust-covered, and barely recognize the face staring back. Sallow cheeks, lips chapped, eyes ringed in purple. You might still look like yourself, but you were long gone. You ate when you could, sometimes not for days. A crust of bread here, boiled weeds there. You forgot what full felt like. You forgot what real hunger felt like too. You were just in between. Somewhere along the way, you stopped counting time. Days blurred, weeks passed without meaning. The market was long abandoned. The clock tower's bell hadn't tolled in months. You marked time now by how many more of your neighbours vanished, or how far the rats dared to come during daylight. You wouldn't last a day, not because the disease would kill you, but because you would forget why it mattered not to die. What was left to return to? The schools were closed, the churches were tombs, the baker's son was eaten by dogs. The widow who sang lullabies through the walls stopped singing last Tuesday. You don't miss anything specific anymore, you just miss the before. The before when meals were hot, and laughter didn't feel dangerous, when touching someone didn't risk your life, when goodbyes weren't whispered through door cracks, and so you spend your time doing strange little rituals, just to stay you. You line up stones on the windowsill, you boil water even when there's no food to cook, you talk aloud to the walls, not because anyone is listening, just to hear your voice and know it still belongs to you. You press your hand against your chest, sometimes just to feel your heartbeat, not to check if you're sick, but to remind yourself that you're still here, that you haven't gone grey inside, that your pulse hasn't slowed to match the death march outside, and then one day, you see smoke. It rises from the east quarter, just beyond the apothecary's ruins, thick, dark, fast, and then another pillar to the north, another to the west. Someone is burning something, not for warmth, not for light. You hear rumours through half-whispered voices. They're burning the dead now, in stacks, in fields, in cellars, not because it's safer, but because the pits are full. You wouldn't last a day, not because your body would fail you, but because your spirit would. You'd wake up, smell the burning, see the red glow on the horizon, and know this city is done pretending. It's not fighting anymore, it's just cleaning up the mess. And yet somehow you keep breathing. Not because you want to, but because something in you refuses to stop. Something small, something dim, something stubborn. You no longer expect rescue. You no longer pray for deliverance. But deep, deep inside the filth and fatigue and quiet horror, there's a flicker, a whisper. One more day, just one more. And that flicker, pathetic, fragile, unnecessary as it is, might be the one reason you're still here. The question is, how long can a flicker survive in a world that has forgotten how to spark? Because the stars are still gone. The sky is still blank, and the plague doesn't sleep. Eventually it stops, but not how you'd expect. There's no trumpet call, no sunrise full of hope, no doctor bursting in with a cure, shouting salvation, no divine light beaming down to say, well done, you survived. The plague just fades, like a wave that's run out of ocean. One day, fewer carts pass through the alleys. The death toll shrinks, not to 0, but to something manageable, a number small enough to ignore. The bells start ringing again, not in mourning, but in announcement. Shops reopening, church doors creaking back to life, bakeries relighting their ovens with whatever they have left. You open your window and the world is still grey, still hollow, still broken, but moving. And you're not sure how to join it. That's why you wouldn't last a day after the plague either. Because you weren't made for the silence that follows. You've changed in ways no one warned you about. You've lost not just people, but language, eye contact, casual laughter, the ability to trust that a cough means nothing, or that a stranger's handshake is safe. You flinch when someone knocks. You tighten your grip on a spoon. You sleep with one ear open, even though the screaming has stopped. They call you a survivor, but it doesn't feel like survival. It feels like leftover. You are the remainder of a story that didn't need an ending. You step outside. The streets are dustier, quieter. A few market stalls have returned. Fruit so shriveled it looks painted. Meat you wouldn't feed a dog. People mill about with dull eyes, half convinced this is just a brief pause before the next horror. You recognize no one. The girl who sold lavender? Gone. The man who fixed shoes by the corner? Gone. The old widow who used to whistle while sweeping? Her broom's still there, snapped in two, lying beneath a pile of bricks. You try to greet someone. A nod. A soft hello. They don't answer. Or if they do, it's a mumble. A gesture. An acknowledgement that yes, we're both still breathing, but no, we don't know how to be human again. Children play again in the far alley, but their games are different now. They pretend to bury each other. They paint red crosses on doors with chalk. They play plague cart, dragging sacks and pretending to call out, "Bring out your dead," while laughing. It's not funny, not to you, not to most, but to them, it's normal. It's all they remember. And you realise the plague didn't just kill people, it reshaped the future. This new world doesn't belong to you, because you remember the world before, and the before world is heavy, too heavy for the lightness they're trying to rebuild. So you find yourself withdrawing. You start waking later and later. The sun feels too bright now, the breeze doesn't comfort. It stirs up the smell of things you hoped were buried deeper. You eat less, not out of lack, but out of habit. You dream about faces you've lost, conversations that ended mid-sentence, doors that never reopened. You talk to the dead more than the living. You walk through the grave fields, the ones that used to be parks. You find the pits where bodies were thrown. Some are marked now, wooden signs with too many names crammed on one board. Others have flowers, left by hands still trembling. You try to leave something too. A note, a trinket, a piece of your old life, but you don't know what feels appropriate anymore. So you stand there, empty-handed, a statue among ghosts. And then the festivals return, slowly. A harvest fair, small and cautious, a wedding, quiet and tearful, a music performance, barely audible but defiantly joyful. You're invited. Everyone is. It's an act of healing, they say. You sit at the edge and you watch people try. You listen to songs played too off-key, see smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. You want to join in, but you feel like a painting hung in the wrong gallery. The food smells wrong. The lights feel harsh. The laughter sounds like static, because no one at that table remembers what it smelled like when the plague carts passed twice a day. No one hears coughing the same way you do. No one else, at least not openly, counts the footsteps behind them after dark, just in case they belong to someone who should be dead. You don't blame them. They're trying to live. But you're still trying to figure out what's left of you. so you leave the party early. Again, no one stops you, they're used to it now, they call it grief, they say it'll pass, but you know better, this isn't grief. It's transformation. And no one wants to admit that the person you were before is never coming back. That even if the city rebuilds, the plague is over, the streets are cleaned, you are not restored. You're a cracked version of yourself, still functional, still standing, but different in every place that matters. Some people cope by pretending nothing happened. Others cope by writing things down, keeping journals, telling stories to their children, marking the calendar every time another year passes without the plague returning. But you cope by remembering, vividly. You remember every face you watched go still, every scream you couldn't help, every prayer whispered into darkness that never got answered. You carry them, and that's the real reason you wouldn't last a day, because you don't know how to put them down. You don't know how to walk into this new reshaped world and let go of everything that came before. You don't know how to eat fresh bread and not think about the starving. You don't know how to hold a hand without remembering what it felt like when a touch became deadly. You don't know how to celebrate while the soil is still fresh on the graves. And no one blames you. Not really, because somewhere quietly they all carry it too, just not the way you do. You were awake the whole time, you saw everything. And survival for you wasn't a blessing, it was a sentence. So now you keep walking, one foot in front of the other, no plan, no destination, just forward. The world is healing, you are not, but that's okay because someone has to remember. And if you made it this far, thank you for walking through the shadows with me. If you found this journey compelling, consider subscribing, it really helps keep these stories alive. Now, close your eyes, let the weight of the world slip off your shoulders. You've heard enough for one night. Sleep well, you're safe here.